The Celtic Festival day Samhain, which is a Gaelic word pronounced Samhain, marks the Celtic New Year and translates to summer's end, or the end of summer. Samhain is often overshadowed by more modern themes like Halloween and pumpkin spice lattes. And while there is definitely a certain ineffable magic around this time of year, I really feel that many of us are actually a little bit blind to the deeper, more magical roots of this sacred day. I believe that beneath the costume parties and spooky ads and even the seasonal drink actually lies an ancient and powerful dormant energy that has been dormant for eons. And that perhaps the reason that so many of us love to embrace this time of year is maybe because the inner witch within us remembers the sacredness of this time of year, or can feel and sense the sacredness. The word witch to me means wise one, someone who is dedicated to connecting to the wisdom within and really stepping into their power and seeing themselves as a magical creator of their destiny, of their life. They recognize that they are not disconnected from nature, rather part of nature, and that the intelligent pulse that's woven through all of life that tells the flowers when to bloom, the seasons when to come and go, even the planet to spin, exists within each and every one of us too. In many traditions, including my own, it's said that this time of year, the power of this time of year, is because at Samhain, the veils between the worlds are at their thinnest, which I think is why it is such a powerful time to really go within and to also connect with loved ones past or ancestors from our lineage who perhaps are there and available to support us and guide us as we go through our life. Another aspect of this time of year is nature's embrace of death and decay. I think culturally we've channeled this energy through imagery of ghosts and scary things. But as nature beckons us towards the darker months, it really is a beautiful feminine process where we're invited to loosen our grip, to release the petals that once captivated others to us in order to surrender to the fertile void of winter, from which new life and new beginnings can grow and be realized. I personally have been on such a powerful journey myself when it comes to embracing these darker, colder months. I grew up in Australia. I now live in the UK currently. And when I moved to the UK at first, winter was something I did my absolute best to avoid. But it wasn't until the autumn and winter of 2011 that I really learned to embrace and love this time of year. When we are experiencing autumn and winter, I know it can feel like, particularly when we're in winter, like nothing will ever grow again. But beneath the surface, the truth is things have never been more alive in the soil, in the winter soil. It's actually in the fertile void of winter that all of life begins. This is true for us as babies when we're in our mother's womb. And so this time of year really does call us to let what once served us fall away and to create space for something new to be born. Samhain occurs on the 31st of October in the Northern Hemisphere, and in the Southern Hemisphere, it's May 1st. And it's actually the Celtic New Year. So it really is, like, if you imagine the beginning, it's the very beginning where the seeds are in the soil. We're, of course, familiar with January 1st, marking a time of new beginnings, like that New Year, New You thing. Yet modern New Year's celebrations tend to lack a more seasonal connection. By the time we enter January, the process of death and decay, of surrender and real new beginnings actually, has already been underway for several months. The Celtic tradition of Samhain can help us to release old patterns and adopt new ones that are in maybe more alignment with the cycles of the seasons and who we are becoming. So it's like embracing what's changing within us in order to step into who we're being called to be. You know, we've been raised, particularly in the West, to see spring and the bud and the bloom as representing new beginnings and being in that full bloom state as being an ideal state. However, the end is actually the real beginning. Because without the end, if we don't have the courage to end things, nothing new can truly begin. And I think this is one of the most powerful invitations of this time of year. Asking yourself, how can you courageously surrender what once was in order to truly begin again? I know growing up in Australia, I remember trick-or-treating, and I just had so much fun doing it. But I could feel the magic of the celebration, but October 31st was the opposite of what was happening seasonally. Didn't understand why we dressed up in scary costumes while the natural world actually was in blooming spring. I realize now, and it took me, almost 2 decades to properly understand that this came from a cultural disconnect from the cycles of nature. And it wasn't until I moved to the UK and lived in the UK many, many years that the power of autumn and its symbolism finally clicked for me. Many of us are expected to be in this full bloom state, as though every season were spring and summer, spring and summer. We tend to avoid the shedding of autumn, of fall, and we tend to avoid the stillness and the emptiness of winter. So Samhain really marks a time when we naturally begin to turn inwards towards this introspection, towards this inner wisdom, self-understanding, and cultivating and stoking the flames of our own inner power. It's a very feminine time of year, and it really does invite us to connect with the well of wisdom within, as well as our power within. Nobody knows what's true for us more than we do, and there really is so much power in embodying the feminine of autumn and winter. There's so much power in receiving our own inner wisdom and stoking our own inner power during this time of year when life seems to be slowing down and surrendering and releasing. It is at the slower pace of these darker seasons that we can fully end our year. We can process where we've been, and we can also see clearly where we're going. So we want to ask ourselves, how can we begin again unless we end? And the answer is we can't. I've got a beautiful chant in my membership, the sanctuary, called Unbound, Unbound, Forever Unbound, that is just such a great one for releasing patterns of the past. And this could be ancestral patterns, it could be personal patterns, it could also be soul patterns as well. Those things that bind us, these things that we're kind of okay, I want to release them, but I don't know how to. When I chant that chant, I call upon a group of guides who came to me in a mystical experience I had called the ancient grandmothers of the earth, who really are the archetype of the crone, of the elder, of the wise one, of the Cailleach. It's also quite relevant to this time of year that we are open to shedding the past, breaking patterns that no longer serve us, slowing down and being unafraid to be in the stillness of introspection. Samhain invites us to embrace the thinning of the veils so we can connect with the unseen. And this could be our ancestors, loved ones past, or just the world and realm of spirit. And also, stoke that power so we can gather the courage to surrender to it. Samhain is a powerful time of year to connect with the crone and grandmother goddesses that are available to help us and embrace what we see, so they can help us descend into the unknown. And they really represent the grandmother archetype, the wise woman archetype. She really is the archetype of the elder. She speaks with wisdom passed down through the ages. In our society, the grandmother archetype is beginning to get the respect that she deserves. This wisdom is sometimes represented by the crone, the wise woman, the woman at the end of her life who is fully connected to her own wisdom and her own power. The crone or the grandmother or the elder shows her own mind. She's not afraid to share her own mind. She understands what's really important and isn't really concerned with the opinions of others, petty gossip, or passing trends. She really has this perspective and is the last aspect of the triple goddess. And together with Maiden, Mother, and Crone, she represents the full circle of life. During Samhain, the Crone and Grandmother goddesses are really at their peak of influence. Their long-standing wisdom can be accessed through rituals and even a mindfulness of the seasons, so just noticing the shifts in the seasons. We can also access the Grandmother archetype ourselves, or we can access her wisdom through connecting with the grandmothers of our own lineage, for example. I have an ancestral altar, and I first created an ancestral altar on Samhain several years ago, and I tend to it every Samhain in particular, but I have an ancestral altar generally that I tend to. And I have pictures on my altar of a selection of my ancestors, as well as a couple of family objects that they owned. So I've got some prayer beads and a cloth that my grandmother knitted, and then also a book that my grandmother received from her big sister. And I've also got some jewelry that has been passed down to me. One question I get asked a lot is, how do you know what ancestors to put on your altar? I've discovered that, especially when starting out, it's best to start with just like a few ancestors, like don't get bombarded with all of them, and pick one or two that you've had a positive relationship with, ideally, who, you might see as like good supporters for you. So for example, if you have like two grandmothers and one you had a special connection with, and both of them are passed, one you had a special connection with and the other one maybe not as supportive, choose the one you had the positive relationship with, so you can tend to that first, and then you can call upon others. And then, if you have a main ancestor that you can develop a relationship with in the spirit world, they can then become the intermediary between you and your other positive ancestors who can walk beside you and support you, and you can call upon their support as you journey on. I know that some of us are adopted, or maybe just don't have a positive relationship with family. Well, if you're adopted, like, you can work with your adoptive family or biological family. It's completely up to you. If you don't have any documentation or memory, or you have been disconnected with family for a reason, you can also work with the connection of spirit rather than having to know names. Like, you can basically just like work on your maternal line and paternal line. So just get creative, and don't let anything like make you feel like, oh, I can't do this work because of my situation. And always just like trust how you're led. So ask yourself, if you're not sure, ask your soul to lead you with this. Colours can also be a helpful way for us to really embody the spirit of autumn. Obviously, the colour black is associated with Samhain, representing, as it does, like going into the depth of night, the darkness, the winter, the subconscious, the shadows. And orange has also become associated with this season, and it's a colour of the pumpkins that grow in abundance at this time of year. It's also the colour of the autumn leaves and the flames that we often see in Samhain bonfires. I also see this colour representing the inner fire that we're tending to at this time of year. The feminine aspects of nature are calling, and these are some simple, powerful ways to answer the call. Really fully acknowledging the call can allow us to descend fully into that liminal in-between space where we gather the courage to escape the busyness of our world and allow ourselves to dream and vision and just be. It's also a time where we gather the courage to loosen our grip and surrender once was, in order to step into what is rising within us. This really is the biggest invitation of Samhain for me, and a great journaling prompt, if you want one, for this time of year is, what are you being called to release in order to create space for something new? What are you being called to release in order to create space for something new? Thank you so much for being here with me. I'm Rebecca, and I'm on a mission to weave the sacred back into the everyday. If you'd like to learn more about Celtic days of the year like Samhain and receive rituals and meditations and classes and chants, then just head to rebeccacampbell.me/membership.